Hi, I'm Aimee. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's November 20th, 2002. So I have 20 years of sobriety. My home group is the Burbank group in Burbank, but I don't actually live in Burbank. I live in the hills right above that. And my sponsor's name is Connie, and she lives in Long Beach. So I'll just start from the beginning since I have 40 minutes left already. I spoke for 5 minutes so far? No. Okay. So I was born into an extremely normal family. So I don't know why, but I was an extremely nervous and anxious child from the time that I can remember. I would bounce my head on my pillow. I licked my lips till they were raw. I wet the bed. I was a fucking mess. And I was that way until I started drinking, I think. But things kind of just got more weird that my parents divorced when I was 5. They were both college students in Ohio. And when they got divorced when I was 5, I went to live with my dad. And girls didn't go live with their dads in 1975 unless their moms were dead. And my mom was alive and well. And so anytime people met me and found out that I lived with my dad, it was like, oh, I'm sorry about your mom. And I was like, nothing wrong with my mom. So they did that just on their own. There was nothing, either good or bad about my parents. They just decided that my dad would be able to finish his graduate degrees and still raise me, and my mother didn't think that she'd be able to do that. And then when I was 8, we moved out to California. My dad and I did. That was quite a culture shock to go from Ohio, where we grow corn and I don't really know what else, and then and to come out to California, where there's just everything. There's mountains and beach, and there's snow and really great weather, and blonde people with tans and words that I can't say because they're partially in Spanish, like tortilla and Yosemite. I always remember that when I was 8. I was like, what the heck is Yosemite? And for those who don't know, it's Yosemite. But so I was still very nervous, and my dad was a serial marrier, and so he had, he had 4 wives and divorced 4 times till now. But when we moved throughout the Central Valley, I know a lot of you, I know some of you are probably from the Central Valley, Bakersfield, Fresno, Porterville, those areas, and I lived in all those places, in Fresno, Porterville, and Bakersfield. I went to high school and junior college in Bakersfield, and in high school, in middle school, I was one of those people who was really against drinking. I smoked cigarettes, that was okay, but I had this crazy aunt who was an alcoholic and drug addict, and I didn't want to be like her. So anytime somebody offered me a beer, I would be like, oh, no, I don't do that. And but then when I got in high school, things were different. High school there was a lot more people. I had moved to Bakersfield. I think my discomfort level really got much worse in high school. So I ended up drinking, and for this first drinking party, I guess, that I was going to have, it was my best friend, myself, and the 2 guys that we liked. And so we had my best friend's older brother get us 2 bottles of Boone's Farm, a case of Bud Light, a 5th of Jack Daniels, and like 2 4-packs of Bartles and James. And I'm aging myself, but we pretty well got schnockered during that time. And for some reason, I was always able to handle my liquor pretty well. My best friend was not. She was running around trying to pull people's socks off and ended up throwing up in my parents' bed. my dad's bed, and that was probably pretty foretelling of my drinking career from that time. I was always usually the one taking care of everybody, but I knew I loved alcohol from the get-go. So from that time, when I was 15, I made my then best friend, because she had a car and a driver's license, I made her drive me around until we got alcohol every weekend or whenever we could go out. She obviously was not a good alcoholic, because she would be like, I'm tired, let's just go home. I was like, no, we are not going home. We are getting beer. I don't care if we have to drive to Wasco, we're getting beer. And that's the way it went. In high school, I had a lot of fun with drinking, because the trouble I got into was mostly because I ditched school. My dad didn't really catch me drinking. He suspected, but he didn't catch me red-handed. I popped a tire on my car one time. He suspected that might have been a drinking incident. And, I kind of went out with my best friend one night, and she told her mom that we were staying at my house, and I told my dad we were staying at her house, and we almost got caught doing that, and really we were just out drinking all night. So I was a good student when I went to school, but I ditched a lot because I liked to day drink in high school. Whenever I could get alcohol, I would drink. But when I went to junior college, and I did well in junior college. I was like on the dean's list, and I was editor of my college newspaper at Bakersfield College. And that was all really good. But then I turned 21 right before I went to Fresno State for a 4-year college. And that was a disaster, because the minute that I could buy my own alcohol, I was a daily drinker. I drank every day, and like on a day that I had a big paper due the next day, or an exam or a midterm or something, I only drank a 6-pack. But all the other nights, it was like a 12-pack or more. I would start drinking as early as I could. And I quickly learned, that I couldn't take 8 o'clock classes. And then, so the next semester I learned I couldn't take 9 o'clock classes. And then I could still do 10 o'clock classes, but sometimes I would, stay up all night drinking and doing other things, and couldn't make it to any classes. So I ended up having to retake a lot of classes in college, because I would just stop going. For various reasons, whether it was just they would drop the grade after so many absences, or I just was failing anyways because I didn't go. But, and I didn't know, they always said that you could have this serious and compelling reason to drop a class after the drop date, and I thought serious and compelling meant death, or, in the hospital or something. And somebody told me years later, they said, no, you could just tell them you were stressed out and you had too many classes. I was like, whoa. And I didn't know that, so I had to retake a lot of classes. But I was definitely starting to experience the problems of my alcoholism. The grades suffered. I was the editor of my school newspaper there too for one semester, and I held various other positions. And I would drink in the newspaper office. We would, drink and smoke cigarettes, and sometimes we'd be there at the newspaper office till 1 or 2 in the morning, still trying to get the paper done because we were drinking. One time, my managing editor and I got into this huge fight in the newspaper office, and I ended up having to fire him and have the campus police come and escort him out, and it was just getting to be difficult. And so after I graduated college, I went back home to Bakersfield, and I kind of re-met a guy that I had known in high school. And I knew that he was a drinker like me. We became, kind of the best of buds, and decided to get married. And I started, a good career. I worked in newspapers, and we would have these big parties. Like, we got married, and then we bought a house. This is all in Bakersfield, where you can still afford to buy a house. And, well, back then you could. But, so, I'm in my, I guess, mid-20s, and I'm married. I own a home and 2 cars, and I have 2 dogs, and this career, and I'm drinking every night. I am drinking probably, well, what I always say is that if my husband and I only drank one 18-pack, 9 beers apiece, then I would usually make it to work the next day. But if I sent him to the store to get the second 18-pack, then I was usually calling in sick. So that's pretty much how it went. We would have these big parties where we would spend lots of money on food and alcohol and whatever. And like one time we flew in crawdads and like the Creole seasoning and stuff like that, all from Louisiana, and we had a couple kegs of beer, and it was really fun. And then we had a few other big parties like that, but people started not coming to our parties, and we were like, what's up with that? Why aren't people coming to our parties? They're fun, right? And I know now that it was most likely because we drank so much that my husband would end up passing out and I would end up being a bitch. And so, nobody wants to be around that. But, there were a few, people who stuck it out for the beer. They were people that drank like us. But, so I guess, what happened was I started having a lot of problems. I was breaking my own rules. I would get so drunk that I would cheat on my husband. I would, fall out of jacuzzis topless. I would pass out in bushes. I was driving drunk all the time. I would stumble home from bars, leaving my car downtown. And it just was getting bad. I was watching the clock every single day at work. I always felt so horrible. I was so hungover. And I would think all day long, I just want to have 1 beer and go to bed because I would feel so bad. And then, a little while later, I'd be like, okay, I want to have 2 beers and then just go to bed. And as the day would go on, I would start feeling better and better. And so then 5 o'clock came and I was at the bar again, doing the same thing over again, and then doing that same thing the next day. It was ridiculous. So I tried to do all of those things that we read about in chapter 3, a lot of those things. So I had my husband and I volunteer at places to keep us from drinking. So we volunteered at the Bakersfield little native zoo. It's called Calm. And so we would, scoop up animal shit and pick weeds and things like that. And then we also volunteered for this group called Couples Against Cancer. We were the token smokers. And then we also realized soon that their main fundraiser for the year was an Oktoberfest. So that wasn't keeping us from drinking. And we ended up getting in a fight with the other people in the Couples Against Cancer anyways, because they gave us all these signs to repaint, and nobody helped us. It was just us. And so, we, these good alcoholic victims, were like, who are these fucking people making us paint all these signs and none of them are here to help us? We're just blaming everybody for our own problems, and everything was everybody else's fault. So, what else did I do? Well, we made the list. Oh, I get switched from drinking beer to wine, and then I drank more wine than beer, so I had to switch back to beer. There was more stuff. We swore that we were never going to drink during the week. We were only going to drink on the weekends, and things just inevitably got worse. I ended up breaking my leg when we were going to go down to the Kern River and go tubing one time, which I promoted tourism for the county, and one of the things we always said was, do not go tubing in the Kern River. And so I was so drunk one time, I was going to go tubing in the Kern River. But I broke my leg, and that prevented me from going. And that's, I'll just say one kind of funny story about my drinking, and then I'll move on to what happened. But that time when I broke my leg, I had to stay back, and so I put a couple beers in my pockets. But this was a God thing. I'll back up just, when I went down there, I was still going to go tubing with them. But every time I would try to get into my tube, it would literally throw me out. I tried every which way of getting in that tube, and it would throw me out. So I switched tubes with the ice chest, and that tube was throwing me out. So I was like, fine, they don't want me to go. And that was actually a God shot, because I probably would have drowned. I was so drunk, I would have drowned, and that was God saving me from myself. And so, I stuck a beer in each pocket, and I was hanging out there, and this was when cell phones were new. I had a cell phone, and I had my cigarettes, and I was just going to sit there and wait for them, but my leg was hurting really bad. So I went up to the parking area, was asking some people around there if I could use their cell phones to try to call my grandma, and none of their cell phones were working. So I walked, there was this gated development maybe a quarter of a mile away. I walked over there, the gate was open, and then there was, the first house had its own gate, so I went to the second house. I'm soaking wet, I have beers in my pocket, I probably stunk to high hell, and I went up to these, rich people's door and asked them if I could use their phone. And so the lady's like, she comes up and is handing out the phone, and I called my grandma, and my grandma's like, oh no, honey, I'll get lost, I can't come and get you. Let me call your dad. No, don't call my dad. My dad was like the last one I wanted her to call. And so I'm crying on the phone, no, don't call my dad. And her husband, the lady who lived there, her husband came out, and he's like, don't worry, I'll give you a ride home. I'll give you a ride home. And so this guy, and his son, he's like, we're going to go get movies anyways. And so they were going to go to, the movie place before we had streaming in town. And he's like, as long as you go to the, movie place with us, then we'll drop you off. And I live near downtown. So I find out on the way, in the back seat of their very expensive Mercedes, that he is the president of Bolt House Farms, the largest carrot manufacturer in the world, or carrot grower in the world. And I'm drunk in the back seat with beers in my pocket. And that was like, I don't know why I was like so humiliated over that. It just somehow, that just struck me as being like, what am I doing? And so one of my friends convinced me to go to the urgent care the next day. It turned out I had broken my leg, and so then I'm home drinking for 2 weeks straight. And this was in, I think it was the year I got sober, but I honestly don't remember if it was the year I got sober or the year before, but I think it was 2002 in the summer. So then in November, on November 19th, what had happened is my boss had talked to me about my chronic absenteeism twice already at work. And what he would always say was, you're a really great worker, you do really good work when you're here. And he said, is there anything I can help you with? Is something going on at home that you need help with? And I was like, no. And I did have bad anxiety. And so I told him, it's just my anxiety. I get really bad anxiety, and then I can't come to work. And he was like, oh, okay, well, just let me know if I can help you. He was really a nice boss. And so what happened was I called in sick again from being hungover again on a Monday, and I drank all that whole day, so that I called in sick again on Tuesday from being hungover. And I had a doctor's appointment, checkup, just scheduled that Tuesday afternoon, because I did actually have anxiety, and they did, have to do checkups for my anxiety medication. And I wasn't going to go because I was so drunk, and I didn't want to drive over to the doctor's drunk or even see my doctor drunk. But I was like, nope, I have to go because I have to get a note from my boss so that I don't get in trouble for being absent again on a Monday and Tuesday. And so I went to the doctor, and he said the same thing. We just had the checkup, and he always said the same thing at the end of the appointments, and that was, so is there anything else I can help you with? And another example of God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself is I just broke down crying and told him I was a drunk. That, to this day, that was not me. I wouldn't do that. It's not, that's just not something that I would do. And I didn't want help with my alcoholism. I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I thought I just drank heavily and I wasn't controlling it very well. I wasn't controlling the amount of my drinking so that I could make it to work the next day. But I honestly thought that alcoholics were like, they were gutter drunks, people laying in the gutter, or junkies or something like that. I didn't know that somebody like me, who still had a job, I was married, had a house, 2 cars, 2 dogs, was an alcoholic. But I was very much an alcoholic. And so when I broke down crying and told him I was a drunk, he asked if I wanted to go to rehab. And I was like, I can do that? And he called over there. At that time, we had 2 rehabs in Bakersfield. And he ended up getting me a bed at the one rehab and told me to drive over there straight from the doctor's office, which I did. And it took them a really long time to admit me. I had to sit in the waiting room, just dead drunk, really tired. All I wanted to do was go to sleep. But apparently my insurance had a once-in-a-lifetime benefit for addiction, inpatient treatment. And they wanted to make sure that I was ready. They kept coming out and saying, "Are you sure? You're sure you're ready? Because if you leave and you leave before the 30 days, you don't get to come back. If you leave and you relapse, you don't get to do it a second time." And I was like, yes, I'm ready. And it felt like what one of the birthday people said, and by the way, happy birthday to everybody. It felt like what one of the birthday people said was that the obsession was removed from me immediately. I didn't have any obsession to drink past when I went into rehab, but I had no clue how to live life. So I did rehab, and I started going to AA while I was in rehab. They brought meetings in there, and then I got a couple of weekend passes or day passes on the weekend to leave the rehab and go to meetings outside. And so I went to a couple of meetings. And then when I got out of rehab, I actually, since my sobriety date's November 20th, 2002, I spent Thanksgiving in rehab. And then I got out just shortly before Christmas. And my dad and my younger brother, they came and spent Thanksgiving with me in rehab, which was really nice. Everybody was very supportive of me getting sober, imagine that. And I got involved in AA right when I left rehab because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't do anything without alcohol other than go to work. And I'm sure that had I continued the way I was going with being so hungover, every morning, I'm sure that was just a yet. I would have started drinking at work because it was unbearable, the bad hangovers. So I started going to AA, and I got a sponsor within the first month. And since I didn't know what to do, I just started doing what all the other AA people did. So if they went out to coffee, I went out to coffee. I used to make fun of those people who were sitting out there at Starbucks. Those losers out there drinking coffee when they could be drinking beer. But so I started doing that. If they went out to eat, I went out to eat. If somebody had a barbecue, I went to the barbecue. Then there was a group of us. We started a sober volleyball team in one of those, city rec leagues. Then there was a group of people. There was a new ice rink in Bakersfield. A group of us joined the co-ed ice hockey team. and that was really fun. This was almost 20 years ago, so I was younger, but I just did whatever they did because I had no idea what I wanted to do. Women in AA, they taught me how to knit. I don't do it anymore, but there was just, if there was anything to do, I would do it because and I was just talking to Colette about this earlier, the first few years, I don't know exactly how many years, I was just learning how to live life without alcohol. So I was doing the steps with my sponsor. I did, the 4th and 5th step, well, all 12 steps, but a lot of people are afraid of the 4th and 5th steps, which I was never afraid of it for some reason, just because I just wanted to be done with the life I had been living. I hated who I was. Like I said, I was breaking all my own rules. I disgusted myself. I had a good friend who wasn't an alcoholic. She would have 2 or 3 beers at the bar with me, and she would stop drinking, and I would try to buy her another one. She'd be like, no, I'm done. I was like, what do you mean you're done? I'm starting to feel it, I'm done. And so she thought it was really great, like when I would have the blackouts and not know what I had done, she thought it was really great to call me the next day and tell me, I can't believe you said that, or I can't believe you did that. I was like, stop calling me and telling me these things. I don't want to know, it's embarrassing. And it was, because there's some things that I remember. I do remember, we used to go to this cigar bar in Bakersfield, and there was this really old 80-something-year-old guy that used to go there too, and usually he was really nice, but this one time he was just being a jerk, and I don't even know what he was saying, but he was being a jerk. Oh, no, I know what, and then, so he was being a jerk, and I was getting mad at him, and then he goes, oh, you girls are the prettiest couple of linebackers I've ever seen. I was like, what? And I was ready to go and kill him. And my friend had to hold me back from, murdering this 80-something-year-old. And it's something that I would never do as a sober person, obviously. But those are the kinds of things that I did when drinking. But to get back to sobriety. So I worked the steps, and then the first couple of years I was just doing that, doing what everybody else did and trying to figure out what I liked to do. I ended up getting divorced from my drinking buddy, and then I became a foster parent. I fostered some kids, 2 11-year-old kids, twins, for just a month until their family could get their house ready, and then I fostered a little kid in one of the same situations, and a 2.5-year-old, and then I fostered a 16-year-old who I was in the process of adopting, because by this time I was in my mid-30s, and I had wanted to have kids but just never had, and I was dating this guy, and when I was fostered, I was going to adopt this 16-year-old, and then I got pregnant. And I was happily pregnant, but so that was really great. But then I don't want anyone to get offended, but I didn't want my daughter to grow up in Bakersfield. So I had a job opportunity in LA. And so her dad and myself and our daughter, we moved to LA, and I worked in the same field that I had started working at in Bakersfield, which was a really great job, and I'm still in that field now, in communications. I've always been in communications, but so we moved to LA, and that was one of the most difficult things in sobriety, because moving from my home group and the AA people that I knew in Bakersfield and coming to LA was, it was hard. I went to meetings around my house. We moved to Van Nuys first, and so I went to some meetings around there, and I asked a couple of women to sponsor me, and they both said no, which was weird to me too, because I had always been taught by my sponsors and people that you don't say no to a reasonable AA request. And And so I thought, okay, well, I had heard all these speakers in Bakersfield from the big Pacific Group meeting in LA. So I decided I was going to go to the Pacific Group meeting and find a sponsor and friends. And I did that, and it worked. I went to the big meeting in Brentwood on Wednesday nights, and I met my first LA sponsor, and her name was Natalie, and she's still a good friend to this day, even though she moved to Arizona, but she comes back and visits fairly often. And so I worked the steps with her, and then I had to stop going to the Pacific Group meeting, though, because it was far away, so I had to rush home from work, try to see my daughter for an hour or two, then go to the meeting, which was in Brentwood. I had to park really far away or be in stacked parking, which, if you don't know what stacked parking is, it's one car after another, so you have to wait for everybody in front of you to leave before you can leave. And then that meeting would always last long because they would have the birthdays at the end, and there was usually 5 or 10 birthdays every night. So I wouldn't get home until around 11, and so then I really did start having anxiety in the middle of the afternoon, just thinking about this whole ordeal that I had to go through to go to the AA meeting. But I'm glad I did it because, I certainly went to much more drastic lengths to drink than I ever did to go to that meeting. But I have always loved AA, and I've always been in the middle of AA. It's a lifestyle for me. I don't know that I would have stayed sober if I hadn't gotten in the middle of AA, because I have not really wanted to drink, but I have kind of, I kind of go crazy, and sometimes I think about driving over cliffs or homicide, suicide, and stuff like that. I don't seriously think about it, but it does pop into my head, and that's what happens to me when I get away from my spiritual program. If I'm not working with others, if I'm not being of service, if I'm not working any steps or reading the book, and believe me, over 20 years, I've had plenty of times where I am not doing any of those things, and they're not comfortable for me, and I have always come back, I always go to meetings. I've always gone to meetings and never stopped doing that, but I, for some reason, will just forget to pray in the morning, or I'll forget to be grateful for everything that's been given to me through this program and my sobriety. So, I've also always been of service. I secretaried a meeting in Bakersfield, after I'd been sober probably 6 months or a year. I think you had to have a year in Bakersfield before you could secretary a meeting. And that's really how I was of service for most of the time up until now, was by, having some sort of commitments at meetings, either a secretary or a coffee person, or, I was on the board of the Alano Club for a year. I opened up the Alano Club on Saturdays for about 6 months because I didn't like the fact that they were never open for people just to go in. And so, let's see, I'm sorry, I lost my track of thought. But women really didn't ask me to be their sponsor until recently. I think probably the last 5 years. I've now had a few sponsees, but I have one sponsee now who she has like 42 years of sobriety, and she's 82 years old, and her previous sponsors died, and so she wanted to get somebody younger so that her sponsor wouldn't die. I'm hoping that's going to stay true, right? And it was actually my idea that she be my sponsee, because we were both sitting outside. This was back when we both smoked cigarettes, but I quit 5 years ago, finally. We were sitting outside, and her sponsor had died, and she was like, I think I'm going to ask Andrew to be my sponsor. And Andrew was a friend of both of ours, and I was like, why? I was like, Andrew's a man, he has like 3 or 4 sponsees. And, I was like, why don't you let me sponsor you? I don't have any sponsees, and I'm a woman. And she's like, that's a great idea. You're my sponsor. And so I've been her sponsor for more than 5 years, I guess. And then I just got another sponsee in the past 6 months. And she is somebody who's been around the program for 20 or more years. She has never done the steps. She has never gotten more than 4 years sober, which 4 years is significant. That's a good amount of time. And I'm not knocking the fact that she had 4 years, but she's never done the steps. And she is still creating wreckage in her life. That's the problem. She like cheats on her husband. She does all these bad things that make her feel horrible. And, and she doesn't like doing it. But it's because she doesn't have a relationship with her higher power. She really doesn't have sobriety. I mean, yes, she has a year without alcohol, but I think it's just dry drunk. But I've been trying to get her to work the steps. We've done step 1, but she's also never secretaried a meeting or held any really, a commitment where you absolutely have to be there. She's been a greeter, and I don't know if anything other than greeter. So now she is secretary of a Saturday meeting, and she just called me yesterday while I was already here and told me how amazing being the secretary of that meeting is, that she's praying every morning for her higher power to guide her work. Well, her morning is at night because she works at night at a taking care of people. And so she said, but she's praying every night before she goes to work for her higher power to guide her words and her actions, and maybe just that, so that she can be of maximum service. And that's what I've told her to do. I said, I pray to my higher power to help me to be of maximum service to my fellows. And that doesn't mean that I'm asking to be a butler or, a maid or anything like that. I'm just asking, how can I, say the right things or, take the right actions to help other people instead of making things worse for them. I can do that in AA really easily. I can't do it as easily with my kids. I have 2 kids now. I have a 15-year-old, that daughter that I moved to LA for is 15, and I have an 8.5-year-old as well, 8.5-year-old son. And my 8.5-year-old son is really, really loving. He's very smart. He's a great kid.